So every morning I wake up, bend down, say my morning prayers to the patron saints of trash, of contemporary trash, of course, who are Neville Dean and Taylor. Uh,
There are a few directors I knew you were going to call attention to, and these guys were among them. I knew it.
Mark Neville Dean and Brian Taylor, they started the 2000s with a string of films that are meant to be offensive and off-putting and sophomoric in many regards and piss people off. And if they have your sensibilities, fill you with so much joy that you will very rarely have as fun a time watching a movie as you do watching their films. And their two magnum opuses are the Crank films, Crank and Crank High Voltage, which to me, if anybody just says, "Hey, do you want to put Crank on?" I'm like, "Tell me when, tell me where. I'm running. I will meet you there.
Six pack in
Let's
hand."
do it." Yes,
Probably more of a 12-pack if you're going to do both movies in one day.
And mysteriously, I don't know how this happened. My wife loves the Crank movies. I don't know why or how, but she's a big Jason Statham fan. But Crank and Crank 2 are films that have they put no thought into whether or not the audience will like something. They are saying this is a very specific sensibility that we are portraying on the screen, and it is going to be something that is going to really, really put you off, or you are going to wholly embrace it. And I wholly embrace those films. I think they are hysterical. I think the action in them is fantastic. Statham has never been better than he is in those Crank movies. And if you haven't seen the Crank movies, the first film is about Chev Chelios, a hitman whose heart is stolen. Or no, in the first one, he's injected with a poison that if his heart rate drops, he will die.
Right.
And he has to give himself like adrenaline all the time, whether that's from actual adrenaline shots or doing stunts or having sex in public, maybe at certain points that might happen. But that's the bend of the first one. Then the second one takes it to an entirely different level, where it has like disembodied heads in tanks that can talk, and it has a Godzilla style kaiju fight where Jason Statham is in this. The Jason Statham character turns into this giant foam like Godzilla costume character fighting in a giant city. It's amazing. But in that film, they take his heart and replace it with an artificial heart that requires an electric charge. So you see him in that movie, like he'll get the car wires and put him on his tongue and like electrocute himself so that his heart can go back into back to beating. So
I mean, how do you get better than that? Like that is a pitch. Like when you go to a studio and pitch something like that, you're gonna get funded.
I mean, they've been teasing a third one forever. I know Statham wants it to happen. Neville Dean and Taylor have made some other movies too. Gamer is like this really fascinating. That movie is like kind of hard to watch. It's so off-putting, but it actually has some kind of interesting point of view given when it came out in the world of gaming. And then they've kind of split off since then. They're kind of doing their own things now, and nothing really of note. Though one of them made that movie Mom and Dad with Nicolas Cage, which I thought was not that good. But
I forgot about that.
Get back together, Neville Dean and Taylor. Let's get Crank 3 on the docket. I adore the Crank movies. I want to watch them right now. Why am I still on this podcast? I need to go watch these things.
Go ahead. JD and I will cover it. We'll cover it.
We should do a Crank commentary. That's what we should do one of these days.
Sounds fun. Yeah. Neville Dean and Taylor movie series or something like that. I'm sure that would also get some listenership as well. I think Jay just left to go and watch Crank and Crank 2. And I was just going to ask if he had a preference between the two, but I guess it doesn't really matter. They're so extreme in their own respective way.
Yeah. He went to get the Blu-rays. For the audio listeners, he's holding
Crank
up the
2,
Blu-rays.
of course, is the superior product. That's uncut right there.
Oh, it's uncut. Okay.
All right. So if Jay just if especially on the audio side, if Jay just doesn't talk the rest of the episode,
it's because he's watching Crank.
He's left to watch those movies.
He's off
Chev
Crank.
Chelios.
I think you make a pretty good point about Jason Statham in those movies, though. At the very least, with regard to the first one, it might be his best performance ever. or at least like it might be between that and Wrath of Man of all things.
He's never had a better grasp on like what his ideal action star persona is, because he's really funny and he very rarely gets to be
in a very dry kind of way. Like and I think what makes his comedy work in those movies is that it's almost like they're trying to make him not self-aware of it, which is sort of the antithesis of how he plays his character in the Fast and Furious movies, which is very self-aware.
Knowing, wink, wink.
Yeah, and I think it was great at first, but it's gotten a little bit repetitive maybe as time has gone on. At least you can argue that. But there's something to be said about his ignorance to his sort of dryness. I think that makes it all the more charming, honestly.
He's like the king of this topic that we're talking about.
Like he really
most of his movies fall into this
category. There are certainly there's some Mount Rushmore figures on there. You look at some of Stallone's like post Rocky stuff. He made a lot of junk. I mean, who else is there? I mean, if you want to look at like true garbage that doesn't really transcend being garbage, you look at Bruce Willis's 6,000 direct-to-video movies a year.
Yeah. But I feel like those are sort of in a different market. Yeah, it's a very specific market that I don't know if it's really in the same league, honestly. But going back to that
elevated trash,
elevated trash. We're inventing a new term here now.
Oh, here we go.
But yeah, as far as like action stars, maybe from that certain era, like you mentioned Stallone, for instance. I mean, maybe like a Jean-Claude Van Damme could fall into that category a little bit. Yeah, Seagal.
Yeah,
for sure.